Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a topic that causes, well, more than its fair share of sweaty palms and sleepless nights for senior high school students across Australia. We're talking about the Australian Tertiary Admission Rank, or the ATAR. Our goal right now is to completely demystify this wildly misunderstood number. We're going to separate those playground myths from the cold, hard statistical facts and hopefully take a whole lot of the stress out of the process along the way. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. We've got 1. Rank, not a mark. 2. Marks versus overall position. 3. How scaling actually works. 4. Busting the 90-plus myth. And 5. Release day and next steps.
Section 1. Rank, not a mark.
Now, it's completely natural to feel this intense pressure about hitting a specific score, right? You've spent your entire life being graded on a scale of 0 to 100. So I want to pose this question. Is your ATAR just an average of those high school marks? Like, if you get 80s across the board, will your ATAR be an 80? Well, it's a super common assumption, but actually, scratch that, it completely misses how the system is actually designed. Here's the absolutely crucial takeaway today. The ATAR is a percentile ranking, not a percentage mark. It's a number between 0.000 and 99.95, going up in tiny increments of 0.05. And what it does is tell universities your relative position compared to everyone else in your age cohort. So if you receive an ATAR of 80.00, it does not mean you scored 80% on your exams. No way. It actually means you performed better than 80% of your age group. To make this crystal clear, think of the whole thing like a massive running race. Your high school marks, your actual exam and assessment scores, those are your time in the race. They tell you exactly how well you performed against a standard. But your ATAR? That's your finishing place, first, second, third, and so on. Your overall position in the race doesn't just depend on your own time. It depends entirely on the times of all the other students you're competing against.
Section 2, marks versus overall position. Now, what's really interesting about this is looking at some concrete data. Let's compare two hypothetical students, Fred and Laura. While they have almost identical scoring patterns, with Fred getting exactly a 70 in every single one of his courses and Laura getting an 80 in all of hers, there is a massive gap in their final results. A mere 10-mark difference created a huge 20-point ATAR gap, with Laura landing at 79.90 and Fred way down at 59.90.
So how in the world is a massive 20-point gap possible from just 10 marks? It comes down entirely to percentiles. Because the ATAR is a rank, what matters most is the percentage of students you outperform in a specific course. A jump in just a few raw marks can mean you suddenly leapfrog over literally thousands of other students. Let's break down the math using English Advanced as an example. Most students tend to score right between 70 and 80. That's where the massive cluster, or the hump of the bell curve, usually sits. So when Fred scores a 70, he's only in the 6th percentile for that course. That means 94% of students scored higher than him. But when Laura scores just 10 points higher with an 80, she rockets past that huge cluster of students and lands in the 38th percentile. Her relative position improved drastically, and that is exactly why her final ATAR is so much higher. Section 3, how scaling actually works. We've all heard them, right? The wild playground rumors. Oh, you gotta pick this subject because it scales up. Or definitely drop that one, it scales down. Let's look at the actual facts here. First off, scaling exists to create a level playing field. In places like New South Wales, there are around 55,000 students studying roughly 27,000 different combinations of courses. It's wild. Scaling accounts for the strength of the competition in a specific course, not the perceived difficulty of the subject itself. And crucially, listen to this, scaling never ever changes your rank within a course. If you beat the student sitting next to you in raw marks, you are for sure still going to beat them after scaling. Finally, scaling is calculated afresh every single year based on the current cohort. Let's move on and see how this builds mathematically. Step 1, raw marks are standardized to a common mean and spread. Step 2 is kind of where the magic happens. The system looks at how the students in a specific course performed in all their other subjects to determine the strength of the competition, creating what's called a scaled mean. So, if students in physics do really well across all their other subjects, physics gets a high scaled min. Finally, in step 3, individual marks are adjusted against this newly leveled playing field. It essentially estimates what your mark would be if literally everyone in the state took the exact same courses. Because this mathematical model is so unbelievably rigorous, attempting to game the system, it's a terrible strategy. The best advice from the admission centers is beautifully simple.
Choose courses you like or are good at without worrying about your ATR. If you pick a subject you absolutely hate just because you think it supposedly scales well, you likely won't perform well in it anyway. And as we just learned, your position in the course is what truly drives your final result.
Section 4. Busting the 90+ myth. Okay, so many students operate under this false assumption that without an ATAR in the 90s, your university dreams are just totally over. It is time for a reality check. While the middle raw mark in a course might be 75 or higher, the median ATAR across the whole cohort usually sits right around 70.00. That means half of all eligible students receive an ATAR below 70.00. Achieving an ATAR of 70 is absolutely not a failure. Statistically speaking, it is exactly average. And this brilliantly illustrates another huge point. According to a recent Mitchell Institute report, of the domestic school leavers admitted to a bachelor's degree, only 63% were admitted on the basis of their ATAR alone. A massive 30% of admissions completely bypassed the ATAR. They relied entirely on other criteria, like portfolios, auditions, or school recommendation schemes. That's almost a third of students. And you'll notice how wildly the reliance on the ATAR varies by university. One institution might admit 99% of its students based solely on the ATAR, while another might admit nearly half using those other criteria we talked about, or even ignore it entirely. The ATAR is simply not a universally determinative number for all tertiary education. I really want you to let this quote sink in for a second. The ATR isn't a reflection of you as a person, and there's no pass or fail ATR. Everyone who receives an ATR has successfully passed their senior secondary certificate. The ATR is simply a logistical tool used by institutions to manage supply and demand for specific courses. It does not measure your intelligence, your work ethic, or your potential in life. Period.
Section 5. Release day and next steps.
So, after all the exams are done and the scaling math is finished, you face the final hurdle, logging in on release day. Now, if you log into your state's portal and hit an error screen, just take a deep breath. Seriously, often it's just a simple administrative glitch. Common reasons include a mismatch between the name you use for your ATAR login and your official school enrollment, like, say, using a nickname instead of your legal name. Other times, it might be because your subject patterns didn't meet the strict eligibility rules, or maybe you didn't pass the minimum English requirements. If this happens, your very first step is simply to contact your local tertiary admissions centre to resolve the mismatch.
So the crucial point here is understanding exactly what you are looking at on release day. When you log into the ATR portal, you're only seeing your raw ATR. But universities don't necessarily use your raw ATR to make offers. They use your selection rank. Your selection rank takes your raw ATR and adds adjustments, like educational access schemes for disadvantages or subject bonus points. These adjustments won't show up in your ATR portal, but they will be applied behind the scenes by the admission center.
And please remember, your raw ATR does not reflect all your pathway options. If your result isn't exactly what you hoped for, you are far from out of options. Completed VET qualifications, like a Certificate 3 or higher, can very often be used as a standalone tertiary entry point, regardless of your ATR. There are fantastic bridging programs, alternative entry schemes, and opportunities to transfer courses later. By prioritizing your genuine interests, you keep a multitude of doors wide open.
Well, we've covered a ton of ground today, peeling back the layers of percentiles, scaling, and admission realities. The HR is an incredible piece of statistical engineering, but at the end of the day, it's just one single snapshot in time. It is not a permanent label on your capabilities or your future. So, knowing that the median sits around 70, that 30% of students bypass it entirely, and that your options are vast and varied, since your ATAR is just a single snapshot and not a permanent label on your future, which pathway will you choose to build yours? Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and we'll catch you next time.